Hello again, students of nonverbal communication. It's Ivy here with part 2 of chapter 1 for our nonverbal communication course. So I am following along in our book. I wrote the thing, I know what's in it, but I'm going to make sure I stay on track and stay organized and try not to make these videotapes too long because that can be a challenge, loading them and getting y'all to get them. So I will be getting the links to you for the different videos. And so this is the second one of 2 for Nonverbal Communication, Chapter 1 out of your textbook, Nonverbal Communication for a Lifetime. We pick up on about page 13, and I want you to follow with that in terms of how nonverbal and verbal communication are different. I said in the first video that if you want to be a good communicator, you focus on verbal. You think about the words you choose to use. But if you want to be a great communicator, you focus on the nonverbal. And so that's all those other ways, and it's by far the bigger portion of how you communicate is done nonverbally. Think about how much you say versus how you look and how you move and what your face does, your facial expressions, the eye contact that you make, the touch that you might have between you and other people. Although, like I talked about in the first video, a lot of this stuff is changing, right? I have some really, really good friends that I've spent time with since March of 2020, and I call them my quarantine pod because we're all really safe. We don't do anything. But they have the most beautiful and sweet golden retriever. And so I must say, during our pandemic experience together, I have missed hugging people. And so I get to hug Sam the dog. And Sam will take all the affection you can give him. He is just wonderful. So even the ways that we touch people and express affection, a lot of that has changed. Will it change forever? Will we no longer have the handshake? That's one thing that one of the health experts, Dr. Anthony Fauci, and you've probably seen him on TV, he said, maybe it's time for the handshake to go away. I hope not. But it's gone away for now. How few people extend their hand to make a touch connection with others. So it's all of these things, though, and they are being affected by our current times, but we'll see what level they sort of come back. So back to page 13, contrasting verbal and nonverbal communication. Take a look at that section, if you would. Verbal communication is discontinuous. I just stopped, right? But the nonverbal kept going because I made eye contact and my face did something and my hands are doing the thing with my gestures, and I'm sitting a certain way close to the screen or I'm backing up to the screen, so that's the space dimension. So nonverbal communication is continuous while verbal is discontinuous, okay? A second contrast is that nonverbal does not have a language. Verbal communication is a language. Now, nonverbal communication is sometimes called body language. I got to tell you, you'll read this in the book, the body language approach drives me cray-cray. There is no language of the body. The person named Julius Fast, back in the 70s, coined the term body language. And basically, his approach was kind of quick and dirty, cute and popularized, and he had these little paperback books that came out and were all the rage. And his approach basically said, every time a person does a move, does a gesture, here's what it means. Every time. So you can get an edge if you watch for those nonverbal cues. If you watch a person's body language, you'll know what's going on. Ridiculous, right? But it was super popular, and people were like, oh, good, you know, here's give me a handle on something I can do. And so in the book, in this section, we debunk the whole body language approach, and you still do hear it. You can tell people outside the school realm that you're studying body language. I just don't want to hear that because that is not what you're studying. You're studying nonverbal communication. There is no language of the body. There is not any one gesture that across all people, all cultures, all time, means the same thing every time. There are 2 fairly universal gestures. There's only 2, and we can't say they're completely universal because we can't test everybody. But one of the most universal gestures is what I just did. It's the pointing gesture. It's really hard to do that in a camera and get it in the right spot. The pointing gesture seems to be in most cultures where we draw the eye to something, okay, or someone. The other gesture that is fairly universal is this one, the palms up. It has a stop or back up or back away. Fairly universal, but again, we don't know. We haven't tested everybody. So you are not taking a class in body language. Gosh, no. Okay. So there is no language of the body. A third distinction between verbal and nonverbal communication is that language has to be learned. Language isn't natural. We learn language. A chunk of nonverbal is also learned, but a whole bunch of it is innate and is very connected to our evolutionary development. There are a lot of things that are connected to just being human and having evolved as a species. So there's a lot of nonverbal communication that's innate, and then some that is also learned. One of the most interesting lines of research that was done on this was studies with congenitally blind children, children who were blind at birth. These children have never seen a facial expression. And yet, when you put sort of a nasty smelling stimulus up in front of these children's noses, as this research did, they go like this. They make the same disgusted face that we make if we smell something awful. We're like, oh, dirty socks. Ew. Okay, so that kind of response, the backing away and the shutting off the nose so you don't have to smell the horrible thing, is very innate. And there's a whole slew of nonverbal cues that are innate, but there are also a whole bunch that are learned. So that is a little bit different, okay? Final distinction is nonverbal communication is primarily housed in the right hemisphere of the brain, while verbal communication is primarily housed in the left hemisphere of the brain. I'll tell you, there's some controversy about that. There's some disagreement about that because when they've done MRIs, which light up what's going on in our brains, sometimes there's more integration than this hard and fast, oh, here's in the right hemisphere of the brain, here's in the left hemisphere. So that is changing a little bit. Just be aware that that's changing. Okay, pages 16 on are talking about the nature of nonverbal. Everything we talk about with nonverbal communication is affected by culture, massively affected by culture. Culture is connected to everything. So we focus a lot on Western culture. We focus a lot on U.S. culture because, hey, you know, why not? That's where we live. But do realize that culture shapes nonverbal communications. A gesture in one culture is fine, and that same gesture in another culture is an insult. So we got to realize that nonverbal is rule governed. You got some rules about you. You got rules about, you know, how close people stand to you, how much eye contact they make, who touches you, when, where. You got a lot of rules about that when bodies come into contact. So nonverbal communication is very rule governed. You may not realize that you have rules or expectations or beliefs about the appropriateness of certain nonverbal cues, but you do, and sometimes you find out when they're violated. You ever had somebody stand too close to you? They're standing too close to you, they get kind of up in your face when they're talking to you, and you're like, hey, back up, dude, too close. I got a rule. Okay? So sometimes when your rules are violated, that's when you find out that you have some rules operating on how you expect people to treat you and you them. On page 18 is a really important theory. Some of y'all may have this if you had it in comm theory. It's Judy Burgoon's expectation violations theory. Expectancy violations model, I think is the exact term we use. Take a look at that. It talks about what happens when our expectations of behavior are violated by others and how we respond to that. Take a look at that. Nonverbal is ambiguous. That's there. Nonverbal is multi-channel. That's on page 20. And so chapter 1 is just an introduction into some of the basic features of nonverbal and how we're going to be speaking about it and studying it for the rest of the semester. Take care. Thanks everybody stopping now, but many more to come. All right. Ivy signing off. Bye y'all. Be safe.